Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are breaking down a literally wild 24-hour overthrow of a Greek dictator. And man, the deeply ironic twist of fate that follows is, well, you'll see. History is packed with regime changes, sure, but rarely do we get a story with this much lightning-fast strategy, totally bizarre political blunders, and a so-called savior who eventually turns into the very monster he defeated. Let's dive right into this timeline, shall we?
So, the big question we're starting with is, how exactly do you overthrow a dictator in a single day? I mean, it's not exactly easy. It takes precision, total secrecy, and of course, the right leader. Picture this. It's the dead of night, August 22nd, 1926. The man of the hour? General Georgios Kondylis. This guy was a veteran of multiple wars and famously carried the nickname Kravnos, which literally translates to thunderbolt. And honestly, he absolutely lived up to that name here, launching a lightning-fast midnight military operation to oust the ruling dictator.
Just look at this timeline to see how fast Thunderbolt actually moved. At 1 a.m., Condylis and his loyal officers kick off their secret operation right on the outskirts of Athens. Their very first move? Cut the dictator's lifeline. They swoop in, take over the central telegraph and telephone exchanges, and boom, the government is totally blind. By 3 a.m., moving with absolute surgical precision, they've surrounded and seized the Prime Minister's residence, the Ministry of Defense, and key security buildings. As the sun comes up around 6 a.m., the dictator's military support? Gone. Completely evaporated. The army and navy didn't just surrender, they actively defected over to Condylis. By 11 a.m., the dictator is completely isolated and trapped. And the craziest part? Not a single drop of blood was shed in the capital.
Section 1. A dictator's blunders.
So you've got to wonder, right? How does a military strongman lose his entire power base in just a matter of hours, with his own soldiers flat out refusing to fire a single shot for him? Well, it boils down to sheer mismanagement. Domestically, Theodoros Pangalos was an oppressive tyrant. He heavily censored the press, exiled his political opponents to remote islands, but he also infuriated everyday people with these incredibly absurd rules. We're talking strictly regulating the length of women's skirts and literally destroying the economy by halving the value of banknotes. Literally tearing them in half. Meanwhile, on the international stage, he was an absolute disaster. He conceded way too many trade rights to Yugoslavia and Thessaloniki and then unsuccessfully tried to form this misguided alliance with fascist Italy to start a war with Turkey.
But of all his diplomatic disasters, this one stands out as truly bizarre. Pangalos carelessly dragged Greece into a border conflict with Bulgaria that history now remembers as the infamous War of the Stray Dog. Seriously, this absurd, highly embarrassing international incident further strained Greece's already fragile foreign relations. And for the military officers who originally helped Pangalos seize power back in 1925, this was the final straw. They realized the guy was a massive liability and he just had to go.
Section 2. The naval chase. So, while the citizens of Athens are flooding the streets in an absolute festival of joy, celebrating a free press and the end of the fashion police, Pangalos is actually on vacation down on the island of Spetses. Realizing his time is up, he panics. He boards this tiny naval torpedo boat called the Pergamos, hoping to flee abroad or maybe reach a province where troops might still back him. But General Condylis, always a step ahead, immediately dispatches the Leon. This was a massive, heavily armed Republican destroyer, and it was sent out to hunt the fallen dictator down at sea.
As you can imagine, it wasn't much of a chase. The massive destroyer easily intercepted the tiny torpedo boat out in open water. The captain of the Leon delivered a chilling, uncompromising ultimatum to Pangalos: surrender or we sink you. Faced with absolutely overwhelming firepower and zero chance of escape, the former dictator gave up. He laid down his weapons without a single shot being fired.
Okay, so what happens next? You've arrested a military strongman and you've completely stripped him of his power. Where do you imprison a fallen dictator to make sure he can never, ever threaten the Republic again? Well, the answer gives us one of the most incredible moments of poetic justice in modern political history.
Pangalos is transported to Crete and locked inside a damp, cold stone cell in the Isidin fortress. Now, why does this matter? Because the Isidin fortress was the exact same notorious political dungeon where Pangalos himself had mercilessly tortured, imprisoned, and exiled his own political opponents just months prior. The dictator was literally locked away in the very hell he had created for others. He spent the next 2 years experiencing the exact same miserable conditions he'd forced upon his enemies. Talk about karma, right?
Section 3. The 1926 landmark election.
You know, history is full of generals who overthrow dictators only to just become dictators themselves. But General Kondylis, at least in 1926, proved to be an exception. True to his word, he stepped down. He paved the way for an election utilizing proportional representation for the very first time in Greek history. Now, this new system led to a heavily fragmented parliament. Out of 286 total seats, you needed 144 for a majority. But the leading liberal union only secured 108. The rest were completely split up between royalists, freethinkers, and notably the Communist Party, known as MEAP, which entered parliament with 10 seats. The nation was entirely divided.
Now, a deadlock like this could have easily triggered another massive crisis, but instead, it forced bitter political rivals to do something kind of extraordinary. They actually united. They formed a grand coalition known as the Ecumenical Government, led by Alexandros Zaimis. This coalition brought together the Liberal Union, the People's Party, the Democratic Union, and the Freethinkers Party. By setting aside their extreme differences, they successfully stabilized and saved the fragile republic. A real win for democracy.
Section 4. The Thunderbolt's Dark Twist.
You probably think this is where the story ends, right? The dictator's in jail, democracy is restored, and our hero, General Kondylis, rides off into the sunset. Well, not quite. Condylis, who is celebrated globally as a democratic savior, was about to strike the republic again. Over the next decade, his political views shifted drastically to the extreme right. By 1935, the former savior of the republic had become its greatest threat. Step 1 of his dark transformation, he used his position as Minister of Military Affairs to ruthlessly crush a pro-republican revolt. Step 2 hit on October 10, 1935, when he launched another coup, literally forcing both the Prime Minister and the President to resign at gunpoint. And finally, Step 3, Kondylis declares himself regent and completely abolishes the very republic he had once saved.
To legitimize this blatant power grab, Kondylis stages a plebiscite the following month to restore King George II to the throne. The official result? An absolutely staggering 98% yes vote to restore the monarchy. Now, come on, anytime you see a 98% approval rating in a deeply divided country, alarm bells should be ringing loudly. The vote was absurdly suspicious and highly fraudulent.
Here's how they did it. The vote was completely rigged through blatant public intimidation. There were absolutely no secret ballots. Citizens had to publicly drop a blue paper into the box if they wanted the monarchy, or a red paper if they wanted to keep the republic. But dropping a red paper meant you risked being severely, physically beaten by Kondylis' thugs right there at the polling station. I mean, it took immense bravery to vote no under those terrifying conditions.
Kondylis had shifted so far to the extreme right that he openly sympathized with fascism. He hoped to become an all-powerful dictator, much like Benito Mussolini in Italy, planning to use the restored king as a mere puppet. In a tragic, cyclical turn of events, Kondylis had become the exact same authoritarian monster he had overthrown back in 1926. But actually, his grand ambitions were abruptly cut short. He suffered a fatal heart attack and died in early 1936, just months after his coup.
As we wrap up this explainer, we're really left to ponder the deeply cyclical nature of political power. General Kondylis saved a nation from tyranny only to subject it to his own tyranny a decade later. It leaves us with a pretty provocative question. Is the line between a democratic savior and an authoritarian dictator simply a matter of time? Are those who seize control to save a nation inevitably tempted to oppress it? It is a fascinating piece of history that shows just how fragile democracy really is. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the narratives of power.